Shit.
I think so.
It was just wrapped into.
April.
Nothing worked.
April, it's Melissa Lowe.
Oh, that's off the contact?
Do you know her?
No.
Okay, I'll forward you an email.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
And, huh?
Hey, Malachi is 21.
So you kicked him out of the house yet? Don't get a place to
Working
live?
on it now. We're getting dinner.
That's, I didn't hear what you asked her.
Kick him out of the house yet?
She is not gonna kick him out.
Ever.
Good afternoon, everyone. I call over the regular work session for the City of Sierra Vista City Council for 22 March 2018. And obviously the purpose of our meeting here is to go through and do any prep work we need to do for the council meeting and discuss other items. I would assume Ms. Ash will be here shortly since I haven't heard from her. She's usually pretty good about that. So we'll start with item number 2, the agenda items. And obviously we're going to start as we usually do with a call to order, roll call, invocation, pledge of allegiance. And then we have a number of awards and presentations to do. And because the WaterWise poster contest can be very energetic, I'll put it that way, I may move the proclamation for Day of Education and the council business of the month ahead of the two WaterWise activities. But we'll still do those proclamations and awarding the kids the ribbons for the poster contest. City manager's report, and then item 2 is the public hearing. And of note on item 2, in your write-up, it says 30-day public comment period. This is not a 30-day public comment period. That was an error. That will be reposted so it's accurate. And we have Matt. You going to talk to us about this item 2?
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Let's see if I can get this going. The requested action before you on this item is the approval of the West Sierra Vista redevelopment plan, and second, providing staff direction and feedback on the draft West Sierra Vista Partnership Program application form. You've been briefed in multiple work sessions on the proposed parameters and objectives of the program. Should you approve the redevelopment plan on Thursday, we would hope to be able to finalize the details so that we can immediately proceed to market the availability of the grant program to eligible businesses and property owners. You've all participated in the redevelopment area process and are familiar with the zigs and zags and reaching a consensus on the boundary and moving forward with the planning phase. I won't reiterate the steps documented in our memos. It's more for helping out the general public and understanding how we got here. I think the motivation throughout is the City Council's desire to play a more active role in facilitating economic development to help stem the reverse and decline that's been occurring for several years in the West End, not only through regulatory adjustments and business assistance programs, but through your commitment of a significant amount of public investment to aid in this endeavor. So the plan I'm going to lay out for you today is formatted to follow and respond to the essential statutory requirements. The special powers and authorities granted under the state statutes must be carried out pursuant to an approved redevelopment plan. This map depicts the West Sierra Vista redevelopment area boundary, which upon the redevelopment plan was developed, covers 23 acres of land comprising 20 tax parcels and 12 landowners that actively agreed to participate in this effort. This graphic depicts the existing land use pattern within the redevelopment area by occupancy type. As a side note, we are in the process of extending this survey to capture the occupancy status of all commercial properties in the city. The black polygons depict those buildings and tenant units that were vacant at the time this survey was completed last month. According to our math, the gross floor area of existing buildings, which on average are a half century old, is approximately 290,000 square feet. Over a third, or 36% of the existing square footage, is currently vacant. The next largest category are the motels, followed by eating and drinking establishments. The city's future land use plan designates the area for commercial development, where all types and intensities of commercial uses may be developed as further limited by the zoning. The redevelopment area constitutes 1% of the land set aside by the city for commercial purposes. The redevelopment area is zoned for general commercial uses, which also provides for multifamily residential uses and mixed-use buildings at a maximum density of 25 dwelling units per acre. The conceptual master development plan framework is intended to illustrate potential locations for new commercial development on vacant and underutilized properties to fill in the streetscape with active uses. The plan shows opportunities for adding landscaping to existing parking areas to add color, interest, and texture to the area, in addition to valuable shading for pedestrians and softening of the roadway appearance. The concept shows the potential for creating new parking areas concealed behind buildings. This could include special pavers and landscaped areas that could be used to define an event space for the parking area when not in use. Moreover, the concept encourages relocating or converting parking spaces directly in front of a business through hardscape improvements to extend the premise for cafe seating, serving, eating, and drinking establishments. The plan also shows the potential for an open-air market called the Mercado that could be used that could be developed as an interim use for existing vacant land. This would feature Mexican products and goods within rented stands operated by multiple vendors. Buildings are small in footprint and can be used from anything from adaptive reuse of shipping containers to modified storage sheds. This provides a low-cost site for new businesses, creating a business incubator hub for retail and food entrepreneurs that could eventually develop the necessary resources to move into a permanent brick-and-mortar storefront. I worked with our graphic design folks in developing the following renderings that depict the type of projects we hope to fund through the partnership program. Now, please don't fixate on the details, as these are for illustrative purposes only. Things like replacing large non-conforming pole signs with more tasteful monument signs will be a key focus. Installing buffer walls to provide a visual barrier between vehicular parking areas like parking lots and streets, and sidewalks to mask large pavement expanses. Adding or replacing awnings and a fresh coat of paint to enhance the architectural appearance and curb appeal of existing businesses and to better accentuate wall signage. Okay. Now this graphic illustrates the streetscape improvements contemplated by the Fry Boulevard West Corridor study commissioned by the Sierra Vista Metropolitan Planning Organization. The overarching vision is to adapt the road to create more Main Street environment that is more welcoming and attractive as Sierra Vista's gateway to the community. The city is working on a similar plan for North Garden Avenue. A traffic study completed with the report revealed that the existing 5 lanes are not being fully utilized in terms of traffic volume. The preferred alternative depicts how the outside travel lanes could be repurposed as landscape areas for enhanced aesthetics and drainage, and wide sidewalks for bikes and pedestrians, going from a 5-lane down to a 3-lane scenario. Now, the concept plan can be a little confusing to interpret. To be clear, the center turn lane will not be converted to a median divider. I believe the illustration is intended to show a stamped asphalt that gives the impression of brick. Again, this is for conceptual purposes only. The specific design details will need to be worked out with the upcoming engineering design phase, which will include consultation with affected business owners, the general public, and involvement by council on the elements to be included or not included within budgetary constraints, including ongoing maintenance concerns. The MPO's 5-year transportation improvement program allocates about $264,000 for design professionals to prepare the necessary construction documents and another $2.25 million for construction. Our engineers have submitted our application to the state to exchange the federal dollars we receive for state highway monies to remove the regulatory red tape that we would have to deal with on a federally funded project, which could add substantial cost to the project. The West Sierra Vista Partnership Program is currently funded at $50,000. Of course, future funding will be decided by the mayor and council during the annual budgeting process. For planning purposes, we are estimating the same amount being budgeted over the 10-year planning horizon. Now, the improvements to West Fry Boulevard and the West Sierra Vista Partnership Program seek to implement the City Council's strategic plan goals of offering incentives for West End commercial property improvements, beautifying the streetscape, and making it more commercial, making it more walkable and bikeable. The overarching objective is to revitalize the older commercial areas of the community, to attract expansion by promoting infill and adaptive reuse of vacant commercial properties. The Planning and Zoning Commission unanimously found the proposed redevelopment plan to be in conformance with the city's general plan, Vista 2030, as required by state statute. You've been provided with a copy of their minutes. A focal point of the discussion was on the proposed streetscape renovations and concerns about AM peak hour traffic. I provide a link in our memo to the traffic impact report that was done by the consultant in tandem with the study that shows no significant impact on the level of service to West Fry Boulevard under the three-lane scenario. And I'll take a break there if you have any questions on the redevelopment plan before moving into the proposed application for the West Sierra Vista Partnership Program.
Yeah, Matt, I'm gonna start here. I want to make sure that the council understands that we have two programs moving that are complementary, that are moving simultaneously. One is what we're up for discussion today, which is the redevelopment plan. The North Garden Fry money from the MPO is the complementary program. And again, that is not really what we're discussing today. And if I can remind everybody, basically starting south of Tacoma on North Garden, the road will narrow, and that's part of this as well. As money is available to go east on Fry, that area will be included. We don't have separate money for North Garden and separate money for Fry. It's one concept, and it's a complementary program to this as well. So what's up for discussion today is not the engineering and the status of the road narrowing or anything else, although that was obviously a main concern of the P&Z when they talked about this. But today we're talking specifically about the redevelopment plan and how that's gonna be affected. Am I off base?
That's correct.
Okay, and again, what you saw here was concepts. If we're in the engineering phase, during the engineering phase, the engineers will talk with people to find out about how trucks load in and out, where the parking is, how the garbage gets picked up, where the drainage is, all those things as we go down from North Garden east onto Fry. And that's a discussion. I guess what I'm trying to say, that's really a in-depth discussion for another time when the engineering concept is completed. So I'm just trying to narrow down although they're connected, I'm trying to narrow the framework. Yes, sir.
So I'm confused, Mayor. So you're saying that our scope right now is not to discuss any of the engineering concerns?
We don't. If it impacts the redevelopment plan, which is actually the plan to offer the incentive for people to improve their business, then obviously it's germane. But basically, we have two things going on side by side that are complementary. But the issue for tonight is we're not deciding on anything to do with the concept of the engineering plan.
Well, we're not there yet on the engineering plan, but the plan does acknowledge that project as it relates to the requirement that we address any changes to proposed street grades and utilities. So it is, in effect, adopted by reference as being.
Well, what I'm trying to say is they're two separate projects. They're linked, obviously. They're complementary.
Right.
But again, the purpose, my understanding is the purpose of your resolution is to decide whether we adopt the redevelopment plan. And the fact that we have the other program running should be considered, obviously.
Yes, and this doesn't bind you in any way from proceeding or not proceeding with any project. It just it's a plan. It acknowledges the facts that we understand them to be today. And obviously, that could change
And when the
over time.
and hopefully
so
it will with the engineering.
It's a directional framework.
Does that help, or are we still confused?
No, still confused. So if we vote yes on this, is it going to push everything forward into the engineering phase? In which case, this is what we're going to do.
Okay. The engineering phase is included in this year's budget.
That's already been approved.
And we've already made application to the state for the HERF swap money. So that's proceeding. We haven't engaged a consultant to do those plans. And I imagine there'll be a process that will go through with affected business owners. And
Are we locked into the lane narrowing?
No.
it's in your strategic plan.
I didn't vote for the strategic. Are we locked into the lane narrowing if we don't want to do that?
This plan does not lock you into it. It sets a directional framework that acknowledges what we understand to be the goals and objectives of the city council and the community.
I was curious about some of the uses of the grant funding. It indicated people could decide to put in some greenery and things like that. And this is where I see the two plans come, where they cross each other. If, when we start doing the road work and the sidewalk work, are the owners going to be well aware of that in a way that they're not going to want to put something in that would be in the way of that sidewalk? And
Well,
did I ask that clearly?
Yeah, well, ideally, when the basic concept is engineering concept is done, the consultant, we would have a series of public meetings, and we would talk with each individual business owner to determine, seating areas, plannings, especially if it's not in the city right away. We also need to make sure we account for deliveries, trucks, parking, drainage, all the other stuff, and the property owners are satisfied with that, and that's both in and outside of the redevelopment district.
right. And the way I would frame it is, the streetscape project focuses on the right-of-way, the public realm, whereas the grant is focused on improvements to private property.
Okay.
So why did we commingle the two in this way, where there's not a separate discussion about the merits of each? Why do we have the streetscape and the engineering and all of that included with the redevelopment grant? I don't.
What I'm trying to say is they're really not, but it is commingled because they're interdependent.
Yeah, I understand that they're commingled as part of a larger project, but if that's the case, I can name off 4 or 5 other things that would probably need to be considered as part of the holistic project. I mean, specifically, why are these two things joined at the hip and other things that would deal with the overall redevelopment not included?
Well, these are in the budget, okay? These are what are programmed to occur over the next 5 to
We have a lot of things in the budget, but they're not all
within the west,
conglomerated underneath
within
one.
the redevelopment area.
Yes, ma'am.
I actually, my question is really along with Craig's, and I guess this affects me differently than it affects other council members, is I've recused myself from the grant issue, I think, for reasons pretty obvious, as my landlord owns quite a large portion of those properties that have agreed to be on it, but I haven't recused myself from the streetscape, and I don't feel that I need to. However, the way that it's been bundled in this way, if I've recused from one, the way it's bundled, that means that I can't participate.
Well, what I'm suggesting is it's really not bundled. We have 2 projects that are moving parallel that affect one another. And actually, the streetscape has been there for long before the proposal came to do the redevelopment district. And it takes, just as an example, most projects, we do a design, 1-year design, 1-year engineering, and then 1-year construct in 3 years. And we just happen to be in the, if we can get the money from exchange with ADOT, we'll be in that design year.
Mr.
This
Mayor.
happens to coincide with this event, with this other thing. So that's the point I was trying to make. They're related, but they're separate.
Mr. Mayor.
Sir?
Mr. Mayor, Ms. Wolf, you're not voting on the streetscape. That is still going to go through a public process and final plans and design. Right now, we only have money budgeted for the engineering design work. That will be a public process. You are only voting on the plans, so apologize for the confusion in that the streetscape is included in this presentation. They are integral to each other, but we're not anywhere near approval of the final concept design for the streetscape.
So what we're really voting on right now is the $50,000?
That's correct.
Okay, then I continue my recusal.
And I believe you are correct. You do not need to recuse yourself from anything having to do with the public right-of-way.
Okay, now I think I'm clear.
Okay.
So essentially, what we're doing at this point, I got the grant part, but for the streetscape, everything else, it's just to move it forward so that there can be a larger discussion to include what the design will look like, and that will be a public process. We're not there yet.
That's correct. Correct.
Okay.
I have a question that probably could have asked 3 months ago. Did any of the North Garden Avenue businesses, were they requested to be a part of the revitalization? Did all of them refuse? They're not, they're not in this little parcel, so I guess that means they,
Yes.
oh.
Or they didn't respond to our attempts to contact them.
I think the charge was that you guys were going to check with all the businesses on
Right.
7th and North Garden,
Yes.
and probably South Garden too.
Everything in the original redevelopment area
Yeah.
boundary, which is the GC zone from west of Coronado.
And I'd like to point out that there is interest from other property owners, but they're not contiguous to this area currently.
There's a couple of historic buildings on that little slab of land, aren't there? I mean, really historic, older than 50 years. Just curious. Okay.
In that area,
I think
Young Garden.
North Garden maybe.
Well,
There's
Daisy
a couple-
Mays.
There's a couple on North Garden, but not on the area that
The
was
white
the
building.
redevelopment area. Okay.
You?
Other comments, questions, discussion? Everybody totally confused? Okay.
No.
All right.
Let's talk about what started this all off.
Okay.
The West Sierra Vista Partnership Program. The draft application form is provided in your agenda packet. The grant requirements are pretty straightforward. The property must be inside the redevelopment area. The grant program is discretionary. Work must be done in a timely manner. We're suggesting imposing a 6-month time limit. Only licensed contractors with a Sierra Vista business license may be used to perform the work. All required permits must be obtained. Work can't start on the project until the application's been approved. There will be no funding on a retroactive basis. Only one reimbursement request will be processed upon completion of all the agreed-upon work being inspected and signed off. No more than one grant request per property per fiscal year. However, individual businesses on multi-tenant parcels may be considered. In terms of review criteria, we'll weigh the public to private investment ratio and impact on tax base, impact on physical and architectural character, job creation, economic activity, the extent to which local contractors are being used, and other measurable benefits. In terms of process, we're proposing applications be considered on a first-come, first-served basis, so we're not holding up projects. Once an application has been reviewed and approved, we'll issue a letter authorizing the applicant to proceed. Then the work will be inspected and signed off upon completion. The applicant will need to furnish copies of canceled checks and invoices to make sure the contractors have been paid and the amounts are correct. The finance department will then process a reimbursement check within 10 business days to the applicant for the grant amount. In terms of grant categories, we're proposing a permit fee reduction on a sliding scale based on permit value. This applies both to tenant improvements and new construction. Being already in the city's infill incentive district, there's already a 50% break on the city's site plan review fee. This incentive would extend to all building permitting and inspection fees. Exterior building facade improvements such as painting, residing, awnings, decorative lighting, and window replacement would be reimbursed at a 50% rate up to $15,000. The interior renovation grant would be available to retail sales, sit-down eating and drinking establishments, microbreweries, and grocery stores for tenant improvements within areas open to the public. We're suggesting a reimbursement ratio of 25% with a cap of $10,000 for microbreweries and eating and drinking establishments and a cap of $5,000 for retail sales or grocery market uses. To bring more life to the streetscape and make it more active and inviting, we're suggesting the city provide funding consideration for patio decks and outdoor seating areas associated with eating or drinking establishment. The match requirement is set at 50% up to $10,000. And again, we're looking for feedback and direction on the reimbursement ratios and the caps and the categories themselves. Quality signage is essential for any new business. We're suggesting this category be considered at a $2,500 funding level with a 50% match requirement for new signage and a 25% match for replacing non-conforming business signage. New ADA accessibility improvements such as walkways and compliant restrooms suggested for inclusion at 75% reimbursement level up to $2,500. Public art would be capped at $2,000 at a 75% reimbursement rate. Landscape and irrigation improvements in a parking lot or front yard setback up to $1,500 per street frontage at a 75% reimbursement rate. Dumpster enclosures would be reimbursed at 50% up to $2,500. We'd also consider other projects not specifically listed to provide a similar public benefit up to $5,000 with a 50% match subject to city manager approval. We're suggesting setting the maximum grant award at $20,000 per property in the current budget year. Again, these incentives are stackable and we'll strongly encourage owners to apply for multiple items to increase the impact of their project. The applicant will need to submit a detailed proposal, sign off from the property owner. They'll be responsible for providing an architect's cost estimate or written cost estimates from a minimum to licensed contractors who they will then hire to complete the work. The city will not be party to the contract or assume any risks. And with that, I'll answer any questions.
Well, I just want to say, I asked Matt to come up and brief this to us. In the past, if my recollection is correct, and it may not be, we wanted to know exactly how this would operate. We wanted to let the people know that may be applying for the grants, what the options were so they could prepare ahead of time. And again, all we're doing on Thursday is approving the plan itself. The application process is something that we've given you the authority to do. Am I right?
Right.
And that, so now's the time for discussion on the application process. If there's something in there that has been forgotten, something that needs to be added to, something that doesn't quite look quite right, we need to give Matt the guidance on those things. So that's why that was pitched today as well.
We would hope to be in a position to launch right after the redevelopment plan is approved.
As soon as it's appropriate, we want to be able to start the program.
Isn't there a slide that shows kind of a little bit differently shows the application? Do you have it with you? We have it on here, but it's sideways.
This is a summary of the application that's providing your agenda packet.
I like the picture.
Okay.
Thought it looked good. There was a question I have, but I have to think about it.
Can you go back to the blurb that talks about needing an architect?
Oh,
So the applicant has two options. They could provide an architect's cost estimate. Maybe work that an architect's cost estimate or two bids from licensed contractors.
Okay, but they don't need both.
No.
do we have any concern at all about designs that, or how do you plan to handle designs have for what he'd like to do with his building and any clash that might have with an overall, well, the streetscape, I guess, is entirely different, but trying to keep some continuity among our buildings. We already have a an ordinance about how buildings, the overall look. I mean, if somebody wanted to paint their building lime green, is there anything in the ordinance around that, or?
Well,
Not that there's anything wrong with lime green buildings, really, but,
There isn't anything in this ordinance. However, we do have a West End
design guidelines.
design guidelines, and that they would have to still meet the West End design guidelines. They're not exempt for those, I don't believe.
Correct.
okay, that's what I was getting at. And could we get a copy of that West End, or, I don't think we have it in the reading room. Could we?
Yeah, one time there was one in the reading room.
Okay. In the electronic reading room?
Yeah, it's in there.
Oh, okay, well then,
it's on the
if it's
web.
already there, okay. That's it. And I think the West End businesses should have a re-awareness of that, so that we do keep the look that we'd like to have on the West End there.
Personally, I'd like to see more color. I think we're a little too beige in this community, but
Well, you
that's,
know, well, and if that's, I'm not sure that's a part of the West End, if beige was.
well, earth tones are really the palette that are set forth in the architectural design guidelines. So perhaps the council may want to revisit.
I think we might want to do that.
Doesn't mean you can't have accents.
Right. But you mentioned lime green as being objectionable or not fitting with the character.
Well, I'm wondering, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that, but, you know, I think we need to, and I agree with you about the color. As a matter of fact, there was a couple of colors I know it was just a design, just a concept, but that might be more appealing on the West End. So, bottom line, I think we need to be clear with the owners what we are looking for in
Sure.
design. And,
Absolutely.
and if we're going to stick with the plan that's in place, maybe we need to discuss that. If we're going to stick with that plan, if that's what everybody wants to do, that's one thing. But if we're going to open that up, make some changes to it, we need to do that.
I'm game for the discussion on that point real quick. Can you go back to your map of how many empty properties we have? Just to kind of start that discussion off. Right there. So I would argue that when it comes to us informing the business community of what we want, maybe according to this data, yeah, might have some problems. So I think that maybe I am maybe agreeing with you, letting them come back and tell us that, hey, I want to put a blue building in here, and if they can rationalize it and it can fill in one of those little empty lots with a building that's going to work, hey, that's their business, literally. I don't think that too many people will have an issue with it if there's a new viable business that's going in. But that's just my point.
And it's a good one, and I agree that could be turned around to what do the business owners want, but we also have ordinances in place and kind of rules and guidelines in place. If a blue building wants to come in, and I'm not having an issue with blue, I'm just using that as an example, does that fit with what's already in the code? Is it a code? And if it does, fine. But I don't know that it should just be what anybody wants just because it brings in a viable business. I think it's important that we have a design or a sense of style that we want for that end of town, for the west end of town. And so before we start granting, and maybe this conversation should have happened a couple of months ago, before we start granting, maybe that should be clear, how this is going to look when it's all done. If I want to put in a pagoda, is that okay?
Yes.
If I want to put that style of a pagoda in our western end of town? So that's just kind of what we need to be aware of, pay attention to.
When you read the West End Development Plan, you're going to find out there's a lot of latitude in there, and that was designed specifically so people could think out of the box as far as colors and heights and plantings and other stuff. We didn't set down that our downtown was going to be a Southwest theme or 1940s brick scene or whatever it may be. But again, that's really, I think Craig's point is it's really kind of up to the property owner and the business person to figure out what they want to do. And obviously, I think they would understand very quickly that a futuristic silver rocket-shaped building might get attraction for the first 30 days or so, but it may not be something that fits in.
Well, I tell you what, I'm going to read
Please-
the code.
please read it. Please-
I will
please
read
read
the
it.
code.
And
But
I'd be glad at a future work session to walk through what the standards
Okay,
are.
we can do that.
So if that's going to be the case, though, at what point are we looking, should this be approved? At what point are we looking at granting,
Hopefully
you know,
Thursday.
start the
Friday?
granting? Friday?
You will start accepting applications on Friday, is that what you're saying?
I'd like to.
Yeah,
So
if it's approved.
yeah, I think I've got two other questions. Can you go back to the chart that showed the fees?
You can plan on talking all day.
Now, is the fee reductions, is that coming out of the grant money? Is that kind of like a credit towards that? Or
Yes.
I know that we have not had that discussion yet, so I'll hold off on that. But okay, so just want to make sure I didn't jump the gun. And I guess my last question, maybe this is a little bit bigger, and maybe Colonel Boone may have to jump in on this one too, but one of the things that we haven't really talked too much about, and you've got a lot of general guidance from us, and you've given us a lot of feedback. If, when this thing gets approved, hopefully on Thursday, and you start on Friday, just a quick walkthrough of programmatically, what is this thing going to look like, from a city management perspective. So if I'm a prospective business owner and I walk in and I say that, hey, I want to put a business into this empty vacant slot, who's the ultimate decision maker to decide whether or not I get it, that my application is good enough? Who makes that choice in the city? Who's the person who makes that choice? Okay, thanks, Chuck. And then if there's a problem with some sort of, if they don't agree with that decision, if the decision goes south, how do they arbitrate that at all?
Well, my first inclination would be to negotiate with them and try to find a solution.
Okay. And then I guess continuing along those same threads, because we only have 50,000 and it's going to be first come, first serve. If you have 5 people who walk in who all want X amount, how are we going to work that out?
Depends on how far the money goes.
All
I
right.
have to go first come, first served in that
Okay.
case.
And then is there going to be a priority for a tenant moving in, as this was originally kind of conceived, over just a absentee property owner to some extent? So, for example, if I'm a property owner that's got 6 empty spaces in there and I just want to do some work on my business, but there's no businesses coming in, versus I'm a bona fide entrepreneur who wants to take advantage of that to move a business in, is there a weighted decision for that?
Well, there is a valuation criteria, and we will strongly consider the economic impact resulting from the grant. So if there's a new business coming in, that would outweigh just a fix-up project but for a vacant unit. So we would prioritize that application over the other. So if they're all submitted simultaneously, we're going to weigh and balance the strength of their application against the review criteria. And ultimately, the award is discretionary on behalf of the city.
Jobs and public health and safety should take a precedent, I would think, over others.
Would it be possible, Mr. Patuchek, that as this starts to roll out, that as part of our executive report, that we can get just a quick table of, maybe not to the detail of the actual person, but there's been X amount of people who have applied, and these are the reasons why they've been accepted or not accepted?
Yeah, Matt can include that in his portion of the report, and I don't think that'll be difficult to do at all.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion? Matt, you got anything, final words for us?
No, I think that concludes my remarks.
Mr. Patuchek, any words of wisdom on this one?
No, I
Okay.
feel we got a good start here, so let's get going.
All right, let's get going. Okay. Next item is Mr. Pregler is going to talk to us about code text for sign regulations. Mr. Pregler.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Mueller and members of council. This is a request for final adoption of sign code amendments. First, I want to talk a little bit about the purpose and the reason why we're requesting these changes. It primarily is for compliance with the Reed versus Town of Gilbert Supreme Court decision, where they basically indicated, the courts indicated that sign codes had to provide equal protection and be content neutral. And as a result, sign codes throughout the country have had to amend their codes to meet the higher level of scrutiny that is now required by the Supreme Court. And secondly, is to provide businesses additional advertising opportunities. The first amendments relate to Article 151.02 definitions. There was removal and inclusion of new definitions in compliance with Reed versus Town of Gilbert. Article 151.10 sign regulations. The First Amendment relates to the removal of the exempt sign section. Again, a lot of these exempt signs were not content neutral, which again is in violation of Reed versus Town of Gilbert. Therefore, it was removed. The Second Amendment is temporary sign, the temporary sign section changes. The section is renamed to portable signs. Again, the idea that if you have to read the sign and you know that it's temporary in nature for a temporary sale or something, it is no longer content neutral. So we had to rename the section portable sign, which reflects more of the type of sign it is rather than what it's actually advertising. The second thing we did was we reorganize the section for clarity. And lastly, we include additional sign allowances for businesses, such as we're now going to allow A-frame signs in the community. We increased the length of display time for portable signs from 70 days to 90 days. Exempting signs that cannot be viewed from a public street. And the political sign standards were removed from the code and a reference is made to the state law. Thirdly, the prohibited sign section, again, we removed a number of the exemptions. Again, it relates to the equal protection part of the Supreme Court decision. And all those were removed from that section of the code. Fourthly, the height of permanent freestanding signs in commercial industrial zoning districts. The current code allows a 10-foot height maximum for these types of signs. In the original recommendation provided to the council 30 days ago, it was that Amendment B recommended that the signs have a 15-foot maximum when fronting an arterial roadway and 10 feet maximum when fronting a collector or local roadway. After discussion at the work session, an amendment was recommended by council to state that these signs would have a 15 feet maximum when fronting State Route 90, State Route 92, and Fry Boulevard east of Coronado Drive, and a 10-foot maximum in all other locations. So it is this council recommendation that was posted for public comment on the website and is before you this evening. Fifthly, setback of permanent freestanding signs in all zoning districts. The current code states that there are no setbacks except they cannot be located within a clear vision triangle. The proposed recommendation is that there be a 5-foot setback for all freestanding signs. Wall sign increases would be sixth. Current code states that the way you would measure a wall signage is 1 square foot for every 1.5 feet of building frontage. The proposed recommendation is that the measurement be changed to allow 1 square foot for every 2 feet of building frontage. So that basically gets them a lot more wall signage than they currently have. And currently is allowed, rather. 7, increase the maximum area of permanent freestanding signs for multi-dwelling uses. The current code states that the maximum area is 32 square feet, one-sided, or 16 square feet for two-sided sign. The proposed recommendation is that the maximum area be 32 square feet for two-sided signs, which is consistent with other commercial businesses. And when we say multi-dwelling uses, we're referring to apartment complexes. The council met on February 8th, 2018 to recommend a 30-day public comment period. At that meeting, there were public comments both in support and in opposition to the proposed sign height increase to 15 feet. Since that meeting, there have been no additional comments from the public. And so this concludes staff's report.
Thank you, Jeff. Any questions for Jeff? Further discussion? Ma'am?
I did not recall that the council actually made the recommendation of 15 feet. We recommended that, or it was suggested? It was a suggestion that that was a possible compromise.
I think, well, I was fine with the original proposal, but it seemed to be council consensus to me.
More of a
Consensus.
then.
Yeah.
Okay. I understand that it's in there. I would prefer that it be, and I believe this is where I'm not clear on what I need to do, but I agree and understand all the rest of the changes, but I don't agree with the 15 feet, the increase in the 15-foot sign, the increase of 5 feet to the 10-foot sign regulation. So I would just recommend we stick with the 10-foot sign.
Well, actually, if that's what you're going to recommend, you need to do an amendment, make a motion for an amendment at the council meeting,
Okay,
because I don't want to start another 30-day comment period.
understood, okay.
And if
And I
you
don't know
get
if-
support, if you get support for your argument, that's fine.
Okay. It was a dilemma for me on how to vote for that, since I want to take that little piece out, not vote for it, but vote for the rest of it, because I totally understand and agree with the rest of it. So, okay, got it. So at Thursday, I need to.
Thursday,
do
make
that.
an amendment if you feel you need to do that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so can you go back to that blurb that she's talking about? So Ms.
Sure.
Calhoun, the recommendation that has where it's 10-foot maximum in all other locations, you're not okay with that one?
And by the way, I thought that was a really nice compromise, or is that the word, compromise? No, I'm really not, because it doesn't seem fair, because there may be other parts of town that would also like to have a 15-foot sign, and we're telling them they can't do it. I like the 10-foot. I drove around. I looked at buildings and areas. I think there's a certain amount of looking of a strip mall anyway in different parts of town, and just having those high signs, to me, just gives it more of a kind of a strip mall look. So that's why I think the, what was the word, architectural 10-foot signs, as much as we can promote that across town. I'm not trying to make everything look alike, but to have a certain kind of cohesiveness to the community. And by separating these two parts, where you have 10 feet in one side of town and bigger, taller ones in another part, that takes away the cohesiveness of the community. Not all, the total look-alike, but, just kind of everything having a nice look to it. No, I don't agree with that. It is a nice idea, though, for a compromise.
Kind of tangential. As we start to look more at the engineering part of the West End, you did take a lot of those freestanding signs down to, the ground, so to speak. How is this going to get in the way of that discussion as it goes forward?
Mayor Mueller, Councilmember Mount, the signs on the west end would have to go down to 10 feet per this proposed amendment. And the idea behind that is that
No, wait a second. Future signs would have to go down to 10 feet.
future signs, correct.
Not
I apologize, yes.
there you
Future
go.
signs would have to go down to 10 feet. The existing signs are grandfathered, legal nonconforming signs.
I'm just talking about just within the engineering slides that we've been looking at for the last year.
Concept.
The concept slides, excuse me, the concept slides. So for example, you have the Circle K sign that's out in the parking lot that then shows up down next to the little walkway. Is this going to present a conflict with any of that?
Mayor, may I respond? The way the amendment was drafted, the increase in height to 15 feet would only apply to commercial properties along Fry Boulevard, east of Coronado, along the state highways. So it would remain status quo for businesses on the west end of town.
No, I'm just talking about where it says 10-foot maximum in all other locations. But then on our concept slides, and what was said just a little while ago was, potentially as part of the redevelopment, or at least the beautification part of that, it shows those.
Yeah, we would like to see the district evolve to a more pedestrian scale, which would mean, the large pylon signs would be replaced with, ground-mounted monument signs. And that's something we can encourage through the grant program. It's not something we can mandate. It's obviously owner discretion as to whether they want to replace a sign, but it's something we can encourage through the grant.
Thanks.
Anything else?
No.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. And I guess you're up next to talk
I am up
about
next.
antennas.
Antennas, okay. Okay, again, this is a recommendation for final adoption of code amendments for amateur radio antennas and commercial or communication tower amendments. One, what's the reason why we're making these amendments? Number one, there's a confusion with the existing commercial communication tower regulations in that there's an assumption out there that these communication tower regulations apply to amateur radio tower antennas, and that's not the case. So we're trying to provide some standardized language that would apply specifically to amateur radios, and you already have the existing communication tower amendments as well, language as well. And then secondly is to provide a permitting process to regulate the installation of amateur radio antennas. So some of the amendments that are in your packets would be, first of all, we're defining the amateur radio antennas. We also will be provides for safety and aesthetic standards. The third amendment would establish a permitting process, whereas antennas installed with a permanent mount or support or have a base diameter of more than 2.5 inches would be required to obtain a building permit. Those that do not meet this requirement will not be required to obtain a permit. So if it's simply just a mast in a backyard, there won't be any regulations, permitting process for that. Fourth, a conditional use permit would be required if the height exceeds 70 feet or the base diameter exceeds 12 inches. And then the second amendments to this section relate to the commercial communication towers. It removes references to communication towers in the right-of-way. As you know, you've recently approved some code amendments related specifically to towers in the right-of-way, and a citation was made in this section to that particular, those changes in the code. There was a 30-day public comment period on February 8th. As I mentioned at that meeting, the city did receive support from members of the Amateur Radio Association. No additional comments have been received since that meeting. And this concludes staff's report.
Questions for Mr. Pregler on this issue? Yes, ma'am.
I don't have a question. I just have a statement. I'm actually really happy to see this through. My little brother, my little bigger brother now, forced me to take my exam to do the lowest level of the ham radio exam for this, and I actually looked up to what we needed in the city, and at the time I was like, I don't understand what any of this means. I don't understand what you need. And so seeing this come through, it really makes a lot more sense about what we need. So I was really happy to see this come through.
Great. So did he twist your arm, literally?
He really did.
Okay, any other questions for Jeff? Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it. If there's no objections on council, what I'd like to do is skip over the executive council report for a minute and ask our guests to be here. I appreciate her patience. Oh, we're not finished with the agenda? I'm sorry. Sorry. The meeting minutes, any additions, completions? Anything on the meeting minutes? Any additions? Okay, amendments, corrections, none. And then we have the support of the VICAP, and I believe we've been approached by VICAP to help them secure a gift from the Tohono O'odham Nation to provide for VICAP services. And then what happens is basically if they're awarded this, it'll come to the city, and the city will pass through to VICAP. Anything else needs to be said?
That's about it, Mayor. We got the request this morning, so we're still getting, excuse me, the resolution together.
Placeholder you should have the resolution.
Yeah, and we've done this before with the symphony,
Yes.
and I think at least one other charity as well. Okay, and now I'll stop getting ahead of myself and I'll ask if we could have Margaret Hepburn come forward to do a presentation for us, and then we'll hit the executive report hard when Margaret's finished.
Well, Mr. Mayor, council members and staff, thank you very much for inviting me here today to talk to you a little bit about the Legacy Foundation. Legacy Foundation's been in existence now since 2013. We're a $60 million foundation and have been actively granting money in Sierra Vista for the last 3 years, I would say. Let me just give you a summary of where the money came from, because usually what I find is I do my presentations and at the end somebody will always say, but where did the money come from? And I know they've been puzzling during the whole thing. So let me remind you how this deal went down with Regional Care. So we were originally Sierra Vista Regional Health Center, and we developed a partnership in 2013 with Regional Care Hospital Partners. It was a unique partnership. It was a 40-year prepaid lease. And the 40-year prepaid lease accounted for about $80 million. And that $80 million was paid in advance, and that's what built your new hospital here in Sierra Vista. Where the legacy money came from was all of our investments that we had. Since the hospital's inception in the early 60s, money had been generated, invested. What wasn't used for capitalizing projects in the hospital was banked and invested, and that was the $60 million. That could not be used by a for-profit organization, in this case, Regional Care. So the board of the then hospital had to decide what to do with the $60 million. And of course, we had a lot of suitors for that money. The Arizona Community Foundation and very many more foundations wanted to get that $60 million. But the board decided to, in Sierra Vista, with a local board, but spent and how the mission would be developed for the Legacy Foundation. And the first thing they decided on was the mission, vision, and values of the organization and the service area. We kept all of Cochise County and Eastern Santa Cruz as the service area, because that's really where that money was generated from over the years. The mission was decided to keep it in the realm of healthcare, and you can read it there for yourself. But the vision, a lofty vision to make this area, Southeast Arizona, the health and wellness model for the nation. Pretty lofty, but doable, we think. So here are the values. I'll not spend a lot of time going into these, just to mention that collaboration is really, really important. One of the things that I discovered as a CEO early on were that there were many, many not-for-profit organizations here in Cochise County and Eastern Santa Cruz that were duplicating efforts, honestly. And we thought that if we could bring organizations together and work together more closely, you'd get the synergies and get a better bang for your buck. Innovation, really important to us. We wanted new ideas, and we actually have a whole grant cycle centered on innovation. Integrity and respect don't need an awful lot more explanation, but stewardship of the resources, very, very important to our board, and they spend a great deal of time talking about stewardship. One thing that you may not know, because it's actually very new, we will become a private foundation in June of this year. We have been functioning up until now as a public charity, pretty much on the shirt tail of Sierra Vista Regional Health Center. But early on again, the board decided that we were not going to compete for funds in Sierra Vista. Had we decided to stay as a public charity, we'd have had to raise about $3 million a year in donations from the public. And if we did that, we would have hired the staff that we needed to do it, and we probably would have put all the other not-for-profit organizations out of business. So we decided to become a private foundation. Should be relatively seamless for all the recipients, but there are requirements. We have to grant 5% of our corpus every year as a private. IRS scrutiny for a private foundation, but we felt that that was the best course. Another priority is obviously our philanthropy, and we do that through as well as an emergency fund that we have as well. So far, and it's actually closer to $4 million now over the course of the years that we've donated in grants, and then the $8 million for the old hospital, which we donated to Cochise County. So well over $11 million so far back into the community. I'll talk a little bit about the grant cycles as we go along. So I mentioned that we are required as a private foundation then to grant 5% of our assets every year. Well, we've known since the beginning that we were going to become a private foundation. So actually, we have been functioning that way for the last 2 years. So 5% each of the last 2 years. That includes the grant cycles, sponsorships. We sponsor a lot of events here, and education. Much education, either that we purchase or that we provide ourselves. There's an application process for all of our grants, and it is a competitive process, generally speaking, and we usually have quite a number of applicants. So, for example, our last grant cycle, we had budgeted about $250,000 for our innovative grant cycle. We had grant requests in excess of $3 million. So we've decided that we need to up that in our budget next year for the innovative grant cycle. The board makes the decision. Staff do some initial screening, and then there's a committee of the board that look at these requests in detail, and then the board as a whole makes the final selections. Here's a few examples of our last year's responsive grants. The responsive grant cycle are grants up to $5,000. Most of them are right there at $5,000, but you can see across the board there's many, many different things that we support in the communities that we serve. In the innovative grant cycle, these are grants that are maybe closer to $50,000, and they can be over multiple years as well. You can see there the City of Sierra Vista, we just approved the Pulse Point application. It's a software application for members of the public would acquire this application, and if they're trained in CPR, you probably heard about this here already in your council meeting, so I'll not go into a lot of detail, but we thought, my background is obviously nursing and healthcare, and that was very, very interesting to our board as well. And then the last one there, Sierra Vista Accessible Playground, is focusing on disabled children and having play equipment beside the play equipment for non-disabled children so they can all really play together. And we thought that was a super project as well. Now, our strategic grants are much larger grants. They can be up to $600,000 actually. And we've issued 2 large ones, one for the Community Food Bank for use in Cochise County and eastern Santa Cruz for capacity building within the food banks there and improving the food security for the children. And there's a tremendous need for this work in Cochise County. There are many, many children out there that don't know where their next meal is going to be coming from. So we supported that last year, and they've done some super work. And then the other large one that we did was SEGO. That was a $600,000 grant to improve the transportation within just Cochise County this time. And of course, we have the new bus service that is in place. We also provided them with an additional van for North County transportation. And Wellness Connection, you can see a little picture there of Adele. We provided that for them so that they could really build capacity within their organization. The Fast Pitch is another grant cycle that we have, up to $2,500 for an individual for education. It takes place in one afternoon. We had 14 people. Actually, I think we had 16 that participated and 14 that were awarded the $2,500. Folks come in and spend 10 minutes telling a team of staff and board members from the Legacy Foundation why they should be awarded $2,500, and they get told, within that afternoon if they've received the money. And we've had some super presentations. That's money well spent there. Okay, some of our other priorities, though, because it's not just about philanthropy. In fact, I have a board member who frequently says, he doesn't want the community to think we're just an ATM machine. And it's a really good analogy, actually, because we do a lot of other things. So community wellness, and you can see there on that chart, all of these areas: access to care, community safety, environmental quality, food access. Everything that's on that chart is of vital importance to the health needs of folks in the community. So pretty much any of these areas, as part of that pie chart there, are open to application to the Legacy Foundation. Talked about capacity building, and here's some pictures of SEGO and the Community Food Bank, the work that they're doing. On the right-hand side there, you can see a lot of the work that the food bank did in building gardens throughout Cochise County so that people can grow their own healthy food. And then capacity building, again, in the Salvation Army, we provided the final gift to allow them to finish that structure here in town. We have done quite a number of different community projects. The one that we are currently involved in, very interesting, is Community Coalition for the End of Life. And this is about educating the public in the area of advanced directives and having good conversations with your family members before the need really arises. So encouraging even young folks to have the conversation about how do you want your final days on this earth to end. Most people say they want to die at home. 90% at the last count said they wanted to die at home. And actually, in reality, only about 10% of people die at home the way that they wanted. The rest die in hospitals, particularly ICUs, which costs a huge amount of money, of course, from our healthcare dollar. But the more important thing is the human needs of an individual are not being met in that particular environment at that time in their life. So the Legacy Foundation has funded a couple of conferences in town, and you will be involved in hearing much more about this as time goes on, because this has been really pushed out to the entire community within the next few months. Our outreach center that we built a couple of years ago, that's where we do all the education. We offer 3 conference facilities in there for any not-for-profit organizations who want to use them. It's free of charge. They just have to call and book the room. It's a really nice facility. We've looked at community health workers and trying to assist before we become a private foundation in the legislation, amendments that need to be made to have these health workers licensed. Of course, as a private foundation, we'll no longer be able to be advocates at all. It's prohibited for private foundations to move in that arena. The health promoter classes, we provide ourselves. One of my staff members has done that throughout the county. And this is about taking lay individuals and teaching them some basic healthcare skills, taking blood pressure, healthy eating, diabetes, the chronic diseases, and so on. That's been very popular. Once a month, we offer a networking breakfast for all of the not-for-profit organizations. It's free of charge for them. We also partner with Cochise College in a not-for-profit certification program, and we underwrite that cost for the participants. Our most recent project, though, is what we're calling Connecting Our Communities. And the Legacy Foundation is now the holder, actually, of the resource guide for all of Cochise and eastern Santa Cruz. It's a real-time document that you can go onto our website and click any of these areas there. So if you're interested in, for example, 1 o'clock there, disability, you can just click on that button and it will give you all of the resources that are available in Cochise County. We're going to work on Santa Cruz. I think we've got most of it done, but it's not 100% at this point in time. And we have just finished last week, actually, making this friendly on you. It's not an application yet, but it's available on your phone. So for all of the first responders, you can just type in LFSAZ, Legacy Foundation, Southeast Arizona. On our website, there's a button, you press it, and all of these resources come up. It's a really, really good, good resource for the community. And as I say, it's real time, which means that I have a full-time employee who's keeping this up to date. So it's always current. We participated in several community health assessments, the most recent one with the health department, and we're working on the CHIP, the Community Health Improvement Plan, which is being rolled out. We have a number of different committees. These are the partners that were in the original evaluation. The 3 priorities, this will be of interest to you because these are what the community members identified as being the most important priorities for their community. First one, mental health and substance use disorder. There are 2 subcommittees of the Community Health Improvement Program, plan, should I say, that are working in that area. Good jobs and healthy economy. We just had a meeting today. We that's looking very promising, actually, for that group. We have much more participation than we did originally. And then the last one, healthy eating, obesity, and diabetes, is the one that the Legacy Foundation selected to support over the course of the next 3 years. We have 2 organizations that will be submitting applications for a $2 million grant over the course of 3 years. And that should be decided by the Legacy Foundation in the next month, who will be awarded the $2 million. The requirement is that they have multiple partners in the community to accomplish the goals that you see right here. Here is our board. We have a really super board, just different experiences that people have. Many of them now are working in full-time jobs, so that brings a different dimension to our board, but really a super, very engaged board of directors. And then our staff, there's only 4 of us, and we don't anticipate that we will make this a large staff. We're not really a service-oriented organization. We're in the business of granting funds, convening organizations together so that they can see opportunities to improve the services that are already in place in Sierra Vista. Questions?
Margaret, I'm going to jump ahead here. I want to thank you for being here. One of the things that was always a challenge was the community resource guide, and this goes back to when I was a council member on the Disabilities Commission. We always had trouble getting a list of what was available and making it comprehensive as possible. I just wanted to ask you if you talked to the folks up at the Army ACS, Army Community Services on post, and got there, because they had a pretty comprehensive guide for the folks up there. I just want to make sure that they were included.
Yes, and Susan in my office is in touch with them. In fact, they attend some of our committee meetings, so there's there's definitely a good connection there.
Any questions for Mrs. Hepburn? Yes.
I do have one, Margaret. In all of the granting that you've done over the past 3 years, what do you see? Let me preface with you did comment about food deserts and how desperate there is a need in the area. But what else do you see, or in addition to that, as the most striking needs that you see in the granting that you do, that people are asking for?
So I think you said it. I think all of the priorities that I mentioned there, from the Community Health Improvement Plan, mental health, my goodness, huge issue. I was at a meeting last week, and I heard that other communities are doing way better than we are in managing the acute situation for mental health. So we have no crisis center in this area at all. But other communities that have a crisis center where somebody with a mental health issue can be taken to the crisis center instead of to jail, which is of no value. They have I think the number was something like 350 contacts they had in one community, and only 7 of them ended up in jail. And the rest of them went to the crisis center. So I'm meeting with Sheriff Daniels next week and a couple of other people to talk about that, because that might be something that the Legacy Foundation would be interested in assisting with. Because that's a huge, I mean, that was very striking when I heard that. So many people ending up in jail that really, there's no value in you know, and costly as well. So mental health, definitely, and jobs and economy, our subgroup from CHIP, you know, I think these are all really important. But the reason we have so many, we have the variety of grants, is so that we can touch as many people as we can. And I think that's really what will happen as time goes on. We'll just continue to have the grants that we provide, small and large.
Anything else for Mrs. Hepburn? Well, Margaret, again, thank you very much. We appreciate the work you're doing for our community, and we appreciate the opportunity to help out as well if we can.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll now move on to refuse rates. Mr. Patuchik or
Well, just as an introduction,
Talking Trash.
As you know, we have a refuse enterprise fund. By an enterprise fund, we mean that it must support itself. We haven't had a rate discussion for quite a while. In fact, our last one actually was a lowering of rates due to the recycling program that we had implemented a number of years ago. And now it's getting to the point where the recycling market has changed drastically. China was the largest consumer of recyclables. They have ceased to do that, and as a result, recycling prices are climbing dramatically, to the point where it may be that they won't even be taken by our provider in Tucson in the future, and actually may go over the actual rate of the refuse that goes into the landfill. So that is a significant problem that we face. The other problems deal with the erosion of our commercial customer base due to changes in state law, and then the issue of the landfill tipping fee, which increased to $64 a ton last year. I believe, since I sit on the rate review board, that has stabilized now, but some of these issues are causing some significant issues with the refuse fund. So Mr. Felix brought this to our attention and wanted to inform the council as to what was going on in terms of potential rates in the future. So, Mr. Felix.
Mayor, members of council, unfortunately, I get to be jokingly called Mr. Sunshine for this presentation in our staff meetings. As Mr. Petusik said, the enterprise fund the refuse fund is set up as an enterprise fund, which means the ratepayers pay 100% of the cost. There is no city sales tax, state shared revenue, subsidy of this operation at all. When you pay your taxes, they're not at all funding either the refuse or the sewer operations. In addition, when we say covers 100% of the operations, that includes my time involved with refuse customers, the people doing the billing, the front desk taking payments for that. Part of their salaries are all charged to both of those funds because they're doing work for the fund. And that's when we say 100% of the costs, that's what we mean. Truly 100% of the estimated costs of running the operations are charged to the fund. The last rate change was on July 1st of 2014. We actually reduced it $1 a month, and that was because we went from the voluntary recycling to the curbside recycling, and the expected removal of the items going to the landfill, and that was very successful, and we've been able to hold off the rates, any rate changes until now. The pressures that have been put on the refuse rates are, as Mr. Petusik mentioned, increased tipping fees, lost customers, new fees for recycling, and a couple of other factors. We've been issues with the county, I shouldn't say issues, but the county's been raising rates for quite a while, and the county's been working on their rates. This is part of the reason why we've held off in doing anything, is because they've been through basically a 2 or 3 year process of reviewing their operations, looking for ways to try and streamline operations, fix things there, get more efficiencies. And until we could stabilize the rates from the county, we did not feel it was be good to come to you with any sort of definite plan, since it was kind of hard to have one. As you can see, over the last few years, these have been pretty significant rate changes, especially, please take note, FY17, we're at a 10% increase in the rates we paid the county for our tipping fees. And the state legislature has done us no favors. On July 1, 2015, they opened commercial businesses up to go to private haulers, and on July 1, 2016, they opened it to all multifamily residential. The challenge for this is our rates are set by resolution. You state what the rates will be. There is no authority for the city manager or myself to negotiate with a customer to say, well, hey, if you stay with us, I'll match this rate. The private haulers have that. In fact, we've had a couple of customers that left us, noticed their rates were $200 a month more than our posted rates, called us to say they wanted to come back when their contract was done, and their private hauler said, oh, I'll just match that rate so you can stay with me, which will, as we know, hang there for a while, and for people that have outside haulers, slowly over time, the rates will then climb back up. They'll have to call again to do it. As Chuck mentioned, China has stopped importing recyclables. This is causing a worldwide problem. Sharon has discussed in the staff meeting some of the items going on in Europe is having the same problems that we are. China is the #1 importer of recyclables, and they've completely stopped. So effective January 1, the county started charging $36.85 a ton for recycling. Going forward, they're going to reset these rates based off what's happening every 3 months to us. So last calendar year, we diverted, the participants in the city diverted almost 2,000 tons of recyclable refuse from the landfill to the recycling program. At $36 a ton, $37 a ton, you can see that this will add $73,000 to our costs. And if we were to go to our full tipping rate, because there's absolutely no market for it when it's actually cheaper to put in the landfill than try and get rid of, there'd be $128,000 a year of fees that we would have to pay that we do not currently pay. Of course, pension expenses are continuing to go up, and this is the actual actuarial by the ASRS determined pension rate. This is not what the 11% that we contribute. There's accounting differences in that. And the other, what they call post-employment benefits. This is for the people, the grandfathered people that have the old-time retirement system where the city pays for their insurance, health insurance after they've retired. We no longer do that, but there are a number of people that are under that program that have that. This actually is, compared to the other two items, a much smaller factor, but it is a factor. As you can see, the operating revenue in fiscal year 2016 was $18,000. That's revenues for operations less the expenses for operations. In fiscal year 17, we're still working with the auditors on it, it's almost $730,000. This is the loss of revenue, and unfortunately, as you can see, due to the rate increases by the county, as we've lost customers, we have not seen the savings on the tipping fee because those costs have gone up so much. When we pay almost $1 million a year to the county, that 10% increase is over $100,000 of increased tipping fees for the reduced refuse that we have. Obviously, we don't want to raise rates if we don't need to, but unfortunately, we have to keep the fund whole. The current rate, and this, remember, this is after we've reduced the rate, what it was $1 before, was $14.78 for a 65-gallon can and $17.10 for a 95-gallon can. The 15% rate increase that we're recommending to you would be $2.25 a month for a 65-gallon can and $2.57 a month for a 95-gallon can, having an increased estimated revenue for the next fiscal year of $325,000. We're hoping other efficiencies and maybe an improvement in the world market would help offset this. Maybe China will start again. And we also don't want to make a 30% rate increase or anything, try and get it all at once. So we want to take steps over time to try and mitigate the impact on the ratepayers. A timeline for this is tomorrow we put a notice on the website. There's a state law that was passed a few years back that says that a notice must be posted on the website 60 days before the council votes on any rate increase, fee increase, tax increase that affects the business. Now that would put you could vote on this, and you would vote on this May 24th, in which case you could approve a rate up to, but not over 15%. So if that time at that meeting you determined you'd rather only raise rates 10%, you can do that. This does not lock in a 15% rate increase. What it locks in is the maximum amount that you could pass time and notifies the businesses and anyone else who may want to come in, get more information, discuss with you guys of what this will be. And then, of course, the rate would then go into effect July 1st for the next fiscal year, which is why we're looking at this timeline, because we would like it to go into effect July 1 when all the in-advance people also have their bills go out, since it takes 30 days after approval to be effective. You have to answer any questions you may have.
David, would you go back to the previous slide? Okay. The last line, you said estimated annual revenue increase. So basically, if we keep the rates the same, that would not be a revenue increase. That would be
correct.
How much additional we would be in the hole. That's where we would be in the hole.
That would be the reduction of you going in the hole.
Okay, got you.
Mr. Mayor, hold on. I'm sorry, just along your line of questioning, because maybe I'm still confused. Yeah, you're talking about an estimated annual revenue increase of $325,000, but you had a deficit of $729,000. So you're saying that this would bring it up over
would reduce the deficit by half.
It would reduce the deficit by half, but we'd still have a deficit, whereas the year before we were showing a surplus.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that was
Sorry about that, Mayor.
Yeah, no, but I mean that's kind of the point. Chuck.
Mr. Mayor, in discussing this with David and staff and making this proposal to you, I recognize and know that this doesn't cover the entire operating loss from last year. What this means is if we don't see any improvement in the recycling markets, that we would probably have to come back to you for another approximately 15% increase next year. if we don't see any improvement
And-
in the
and that-
numbers.
And that brings up another concern I had from the briefing, is if the county is gonna set rates every 3 months, and they go up and up and up, then we're really gonna be in a fix 2 years that we gotta wait on an annual basis, and if we have to wait 60 days before we, by the state legislator, I mean, it's mechanically, it doesn't flow.
Well, we still have reserve.
Is the reserve in the fund, or is it city reserves?
It's in the refuse fund.
We have reserve in the refuse fund.
Yes, sir.
So that's the other, then that brings up another question. If we have X amount of reserve, is it to use part of the reserve to overcome the deficit?
Historically, in the past, back when we were implementing the automated refuse service from the jumpsman on the back of the trucks, the fund actually went about 2 years because, again, like this, we did not want to have a 20-30% rate increase go out to the public. So there is a multi-year, 10% a year, over 3 years to bring the fund back to a positive.
How much is in the fund?
After the end of this fiscal year, there'll be about $900,000 left in the fund. This eats up almost half of the fund balance.
Isn't it
Yes, ma'am.
better to go ahead and stay in the positive side than to keep dipping down into a negative? I mean, doesn't that negative build year over year over year?
The fund balance would decrease. Hopefully that this would take the loss the next year to a $300,000 loss, everything being the same. We're hoping that possibly some people will continue to decide they don't want to call Waste Management every month to get their bills reset and just be done with it and come back to us. We do offer better service. And while we have recycling, they can do that. But it's...
Mr. Mayor, members of council, clearly, it's always been our desire to hold rates down as low as possible. And you can see that from the track record in terms of what we've had regarding refuse rate increases. This is, completely a different set of circumstances we had. Recyclables actually were money-making even as late as a couple of years ago. The entire market has changed, and now we have a populace that is used to recycling, probably desirous of recycling, but now we'll be in a situation where the recyclables may actually cost more per ton than the refuse going into the landfill, and the potential then of the vendors not even taking the recycling, basically making it worthless or the same value as the refuse going in. Staff came to me with 2 proposals for 8 to 10%. I looked at the numbers and felt that we needed to go at least 15. It's really just a balancing act to see how well we do this year, whether or not we're able to, stabilize the fund. But it's entirely possible that we may need to come back. So really the decision point is it the desire of the council to go higher this year in an attempt to stabilize the fund, or try and see what happens with the recycling markets this year, stay with this 15% recommendation, and then adjust again next year if possible. So those are really the 2 options that we have.
Mr. Mayor, I got a
Go ahead.
All right, so this doesn't make sense to me. Here's the reason why. You said just a minute ago that one of the competitive advantages that our competition has is that they can change their rates whenever they want, and that we have to post our rates, and then they can simply come in and match it and undercut it, et cetera. Correct. So that's right, but this is also kind of banking on the idea that commercial makes a comeback, and they think that we're going to somehow be able to kind of work through this. Is the commercial rates going to change at all?
No. This is a recommendation for residential rate increases only.
And the reason for that is an increase in commercial rates.
Yeah, they'll just undercut all of it, and that's
would
it.
Just exacerbate the loss of commercial revenue.
So I guess the point then is, and this will kind of come back anytime we do something like this, I guess, but basically what we're looking at is if it's a $30 increase to the residential, that's essentially, if we take that and we multiply it out, we have a $30 increase to every residential user in the city. So that's how many people do we have in the city that are going to now have $30 taken out of their bank account that's going to come to basically pay for trash? I mean, how many customers do you have?
We have about 10,000 to 11,000 customers in the city,
Okay,
all
so
combined.
Okay, so 10,000 customers at $30 a pop, that's going to pay for trash. How much money now is leaving the pocketbooks that would be going to businesses that is now having to pay for an increase in trash?
The
So
$30 a person.
Right. So I think that's something to consider. The other, yep, $30 per customer. Well, $30 per customer, but it's 10,000.
Yes.
Okay.
Sold, basically.
Okay, so that's something to consider. Why don't we just open this all up to the private market and bring in 2 residential private companies to worry about this?
Because, well,
Or
that's
2 or
also-
more.
That's an option. That was reviewed 2 years ago by council.
Yep.
And council did not wish to do it because that would cause the sewer rate increase. Because all the billing people that currently are split between sewer and refuse, they would go to the sewer fund. Because we still have 10,000 sewer customers. So the sewer fund would pick that cost up. The second thing is, we've also compared to the private haulers in the area. We've had 5 people. The average for a major hauler in the area is $90 a month, or $30 a month, $90 a quarter. So using your same point, a person with a 65-gallon can would go from $14.78 a month to $30 a month, thereby taking an extra $15 a month out of their pocket and the businesses to pay that private hauler instead.
If you put in 2 commercial trash haulers to work the residential, then we know what their costs are going to be. We know what they're going to charge.
We know what they charge to county residents right now.
We know what their rates are in the county.
And those that have stayed with them overhand. And understand, too, we do still have commercial customers, and most of them have stayed with us because of the service. They've dealt with private haulers in the past and do not wish to deal with them again.
Also, as a frame of reference, at the county level, when we actually tried going out for proposals for privatization of the entire system to include the landfill, transportation, and the transfer stations, and we received exactly 0 bids for that. And the reason for that, volumes are not high enough, and the transportation costs and the distances involved eat up any potential profits for the private businesses. Yes, it probably would be easier for us to privatize our residential service in town, residential and commercial service. As David mentioned, there is no cost control or price control once we do that. Our customers are then at the mercy of the private haulers. That may or may not be a good thing. We know the prices are higher right now, so we would be one level of competition that would be taken out of the equation at that point. And the other and probably more significant issue is as David mentioned in his presentation, the fact that there are allocations for his salary, my salary, other people's that work on the administrative side of the house that are being paid fractionally out of the refuse fund.
You have an overhead
would
claim
go
built
away.
into this.
That would go away at that point, and the general fund would have to pick up a great percentage of that cost.
Didn't we try this one time many years ago, and we had, or was it Sierra Vista or somewhere else where they
Well,
just went out of business?
that was in Bob's
basically?
day, but that was a long time ago. We didn't have a lot of private haulers at that time. It was tried. They went out of business, and then the city had to scramble to get back into the business. I don't necessarily think that would be the case this time around, Councilmember Gray. But to get back to Councilmember Mount's point, I think at some point, if these costs keep going up, if recycling keeps going up, We do face the prospect of privatization. I don't think there's any question about that in the future. If our commercial accounts continue to erode, it's going to make it more and more difficult for us to keep our rates at a substantially lower rate than what's being charged in the county for service. And I do believe that we as staff then need to owe you some sort of an exit strategy or a way that we can transition to that without negative, or at least mitigating the negative budget impact that will occur as a result.
This is outside the box thinking, very outside the box, but you said something that inspired me and I want to get it out there. What about, and obviously none of the privatization of this would happen overnight anyways, but when you're losing $700,000, we got to start, as to your point, we got to start considering it. What about any effort to, say, use a subcontract or a contractor who's working for the city to slowly start to keep the costs low and then to start to transition to privatization if it looks like that it's not going to work? That way we can still control the rates, and then we can open that up to a bidding process to allow whatever companies that would want to bid on it to come in at a rate that we would find acceptable.
There is the potential of doing that, yes.
The biggest challenge, Councilmember Mount, is that tipping fee. And that is, by agreement, all refuse generated in the city must go to the county landfill.
Is there an alternative to the county?
Somebody undercutting us.
Is there an alternative to the county that we could consider?
Well, as the city manager mentioned, we looked at private people that come in. They looked at private people that come in and take it over, and there isn't. But we are bound by contract to be with the county landfill.
For how long?
Until the contract comes up again.
Well, when is that?
What, we're probably, 8 years away from that?
Yes.
I would say.
Do we have anything that we can charge the county?
Without us, our participation in the regional county refuse concept, I think it would be very difficult for the county to operate a landfill operation since we make up the preponderance of the refuse that goes into it. Also, the preponderance of the recycling. It's possible a private hauler would want to haul to Tucson as opposed to going, if we didn't stipulate that they had to use the landfill.
Can you provide counsel with the termination language that's in the contract, that maybe there's something there that says if they get to the point of excessiveness, that where we're losing $750,000 with them raising their fees to some extent, obviously, that there's got to be something in that contract that allows some sort of a mutual break.
It's an intergovernmental agreement, and we'd be happy to provide you with that.
Thank you.
Is there, did you say that there will not be any more increases? And how could that be?
No, what we're saying is we're doing a first increase this year.
I mean from the tipping fees by the county.
Sure. I'll have to address that one. The system, the refuse system, owes the County Board of Supervisors. It got up to roughly about $3 million, $2.5 to $3 million, and the board directed us to look at ways to whittle that deficit down. That was the impetus for trying to go out and privatize the system. When that didn't happen, we determined to bite the bullet and implement the 10% increase. Now we have seen that situation turn around as a result of that, and in fact, they should be able to run in the black, and now we're starting to pay the supervisors off. So in looking at the numbers, I think we were about 6 or 7 years at the rate we were going at this point to pay off the supervisors, and I think that would be a big help to the health of the fund. Just a general comment, refuse business is a perverse business. We want to recycle, we want to do the right thing, but the fact of the matter is the more refuse you have in a system like this, the better it operates, the more money it makes. So when we take refuse out for recycling, or we lose customers, or lose population, that all hurts the system when that happens.
And one more, I don't know anything about that business, but what keeps America from not having more recycling businesses that will do what China's doing?
Councilmember Calhoun, it's really just, you know, what will a market bear for the recyclables, and, you know, the costs associated with getting them and reprocessing them. And I think that's really the major reason why there is not more, you know, recycling business going on in the United States. And that's why it was going to China. They were paying more at the time. And
Their labor's a little cheaper, Chuck. I mean, let's be honest.
There's a lot of differences. Absolutely.
And this is my question, and this is, I'm not at this point either yay or nay for the rate increase, but is there any way that we can put something on the bills that are going out to people now and monthly to let them know that there is the possibility of a rate increase in the future, so if it does happen, they are more prepared for it than just 30 days?
Yeah. Well, after this meeting, we plan on posting, as Mr. Felix presented, and we can get that out on all of our outlets to let the public know.
And can we send it when we send the bill? Because I know I'm not going to say I may be one of those people that don't always visit websites as often as I should. But is there any way to just put just a line on the bill to say that there is a possibility that this could occur and it will increase whatever, should they decide?
Yes, we've been able to post a notice on the bill, a small one-sentence notice on the bill. That would be the May bill, since the March bill has gone out, and the May bill is the next one to go out.
Sure. Then
And it would be posted on there that on this date, or we'd work with PIO to put something.
But we'll start getting it out on our other outlets right away.
And even more than just a notification, along the way, I think it would be important for the public to hear this story, to understand, because we are so invested in recycling, but to hear the big picture. Maybe this is a job for the newspaper, but it's one thing to hear you're going to have to pay a little more on your bill. It's another to really understand why. And this story is pretty compelling, I think, about the good we want to do, but at what cost? And how do you deal with that?
Councilmember Calhoun, we started that process. Marty Haverty, who is the County Solid Waste Director, and I made a presentation to the Environmental Affairs Commission last month, and went over all the reasons why, and it was a very good session. This is our first attempt at trying to get it out there to the public. Unfortunately, you know, well, you see what we have, and we don't have the newspaper.
Yeah, but Chuck,
here.
that tells us that Judy's going to have to do some legwork to get this out.
We're gonna have to put out press releases and get it out to the media. Yes.
When it comes to dealing with the county and the tipping fees and all that, are we their biggest customer, so to speak?
Yes, we're at one time, we were 2/3 of the customer base for the county.
Sounds like great leverage to renegotiate with. All right.
Okay, next steps, guys?
We'll be noticing it on the website, and then you will, on May 24th, obviously we'll discuss it again on the work session before the council meeting, but on May 24th is when it would actually come to you for an official vote. There can be other discussions if you want between now and then, but we wanted to make sure to give the information to you so that it could be noticed on the website, and you all had an understanding of what and why. So,
and I would encourage everybody, if you still have questions, which I'm assuming most of us will, that you get with Chuck and David to make sure we understand the ins and outs of this issue, because anytime we do a rate increase, it's going to cause some consternation with the public, especially if they don't understand why it's happening. Okay? Any other questions for David? Thank you, Mr. Felix. Since we're well past time, guys, I would propose if you have quick questions on the executive report or something that you absolutely have to talk about, reference trips, future meetings, et cetera, board commission liaison, future discussion items, that we do it in a quick manner. Anybody? Yes, ma'am.
Regarding recent trips, I just recently returned from the NLC meeting, and I'll submit a complete report on that. And then I have a couple of things on commissions. That'll be very brief. Should I go?
Go for it.
Okay, nobody else had recent trips. On commissions.
Do them all at once.
Oh, okay.
Your turn.
On commissions, I think we discussed last month about a tasking for West End. And I would like to proceed with that, but I'll make a copy of it and I'll send it out. And then we can put it on agenda for the next meeting.
Okay.
Also, I have a couple of there have been 2 resignations on the Sister Cities Commission, plus the fact that Sister Cities has developed their 501c3. And so I would like to discuss with the council whether we will continue to have a Sister Cities Commission or just develop a relationship with the Sister Cities Association, which is the 501c3.
And as we discussed when we talked about this, is the staff is making a recommendation, because obviously we need to have the formal government-to-government relations with the two cities, as well as the cultural exchanges and all the other things that they do with the 501c3. And it may be time for staff to make a recommendation to that before we even talk about it, because I think it's fairly simple.
Okay.
Yeah, and she's nodding her head. I know she's working on it. So we need to get her report really as part of that discussion.
And finally, I would like to talk with the Diversity Commission, which now does not have a quorum, and consider a couple of taskings for the Diversity Commission. But we need to build them up first before we do that. So future discussion items.
Okay. Did you get that, Victoria? Anybody else? Ms. Bertucci, was there anything in the executive report that you felt you needed to get out and bring it up for discussion?
Well, most of it's there. The CCOM board is meeting first week of April, and we're looking at hiring an executive director for that and working through potential budget scenarios, and Victoria's working on that. The tribute case with ADWR and Castle and Cook went before the state Supreme Court last week, and we expect a decision on that sometime this summer. Also, Victoria is leading the staff effort in constructing the 2018-2019 budget, and we will include updates regarding our progress on that in future reports then, and we'll be talking about it more as we go along. So.
Okay. Anybody else? Last call?
Just wait till next time.
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Hi, Ron.